Welcome back to another episode of the Packs What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perri Goldstein. A really, really, really good Week 17 matchup here coming. Weirdly, the exact same scenario for the Packers as last year. Had to travel in Week 17 to Minnesota, then home at Lambeau Field to host the Bears in Week 18. Happening again this year, traveling to the Vikings and then home to host the Bears in Week 18. But this is a very different scenario for all parties involved. Packers and Vikings going to be a much different game than we saw last season. Obviously, the Packers have already clinched their playoff scenario. Vikings have already clinched their playoff spot, and the Vikings are still kind of in contention for the number one seed in the playoffs. So a lot riding on this one. And Perri, we're going to talk about it. It's going to be a really good game.
Crazy. We were talking pre-show, and we'll dive into it while we record, about all the playoff scenarios still yet to play out. And I can't remember a time when the entirety, not just like the 1 or the 2 seed or like the bottom side, but like all 7 spots were just like kind of up for grabs. Like we know the players that are going to make it, but like where they all fall within that seeding is still like very much on the line. And I think it's really going to come down to like Week 18. And I just can't remember the last time that happened.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with that because I think that is really interesting here. Obviously, the Packers hoping to win out. Of course, you just want that for momentum's sake. You want that for the tiebreakers in the division. The Packers currently 1-3 against the NFC North, which is so unlike what we're used to seeing out of them. Obviously dropped 1 to the Vikings and 2 to the Lions. So you'd like to see them get some momentum against those teams going into the playoffs. Especially a team like the Vikings that they arguably could see again. They could see the Lions again too, but Packers basically need to win out and have a couple things happen for them to get the 5th seed. Right now, it seems like their most likely path is the 6th seed, and their most likely opponent would be traveling to LA to play the Rams on wildcard weekend. A lot of familiarity with NFC West teams in the playoffs, right? They've seen the Seahawks, they've seen the Rams, they've seen the Niners a ton. So that is a matchup we've seen already from the Packers this season. The Packers did sweep the NFC North, or the NFC West. So that potentially could be the Packers matchup. Gets really interesting for Minnesota now because they, like I said before, are still in contention for the number 1 seed in the postseason. They need some help. Obviously, they need the Lions to drop. They need the Eagles, I believe, to drop 1. But there is a world where the Vikings can win the division by winning this week against Green Bay and then winning next week against the Lions, which we don't know what that's going to look like for the Lions. They're a really banged up football team. I would imagine nobody's resting their starters at this point because you still want, if you're in contention for the 1 seed, you want the bye. So you're going to play for the bye and then heal up in that gap. But yeah, so the Vikings potentially, if they win out, could be. The Lions need the Vikings to drop 1, obviously. And then it doesn't really matter for them. If the Vikings lose at all, the Lions hold the tiebreaker. So the Lions are rooting for Packers this week to take care of the Vikings so they don't have to do it next week. And then you've got the Eagles who could kind of sneak in there if the Lions drop a couple, even if the Vikings win 1. The Eagles win out, they could be the number 1 seed, and the Vikings could win the division and still fall into the 2nd seed, hosting the 7th seed, likely the Commanders, on wildcard weekend. So lots of scenarios here for the entire NFC, like you said. And then we've got the 5th seed, who could be the Lions, the Vikings, or the Packers, traveling to either the Bucs or the Falcons. We don't know who that's going to be yet. So everything's up in the air.
Yeah, it's really nuts. And like the 7th seed is most likely going to be Washington. But at the same time, if crazy things happen and people start dropping games, the Packers could even drop to the 7th seed. Not that we hope or think that that's going to happen. But, we just watched the Commanders beat the Eagles, and no team is infallible at this point. So it's perfectly possible that these teams that have looked like juggernauts do lose one of the next 2 games. I think it's really interesting that the Packers, the Lions, the Vikings, all being in the playoffs now are all about to play each other at the end of the season. Not that the schedulers knew that was going to happen, but just the fact that each of them need the wins and are now needing the wins against one another, are going to make these games really interesting, probably really contentious and really intense. To your point, I agree. I don't think anyone is resting their starters. Everyone's coming in with 100% like full go as much as they can. I think both the Eagles and the Lions are rooting for the Packers in this game. The Packers are rooting for the Packers in this game. Nobody expected the Vikings to be in the position that they're in when the season started. I think we both certainly did not. So kudos to them for having the season that they've had. This is going to be a really intense game. We talked about it before the show, but they are super, super healthy at the moment. Unlike the Packers, who are probably still going to be missing a few starters, the same starters that they've been missing the last few games. So nothing new there, but this is going to be strength on strength, and we'll probably dive into it unless we have more thoughts about the playoff scenarios. But yeah, the Packers need this win, 2 more wins, and they can lock up the 5 seed. But I think at this point, and I want your opinion on this, to me, they're in a good spot, 5 or 6 seed either way. They're going on the road. Playing the NFC West or the NFC South, to me, is still a favorable matchup for this team. So obviously, like you said, you want them to win out for momentum's sake, for the tiebreaker's sake, just for all the reasons why teams want to win football games. But wherever they land in particular, I think it's going to be, they're playing on wildcard weekend. They're going on the road, and they're going to play a team that I think they have an advantage over.
Yeah, and I think, just to kind of put a bow on that, it's interesting looking at the playoff picture because pretty much all of these matchups have happened previously. The Vikings actually lost to the Rams. That's one of their 2 losses on the season. It was the Rams and the Lions. So the Vikings potentially being the 6th seed and having to travel to LA would be really interesting. The Lions lost to the Buccaneers really early in the season. So completely different looking football team at this point. But there is a scenario where the Lions win the 5th seed and the Buccaneers win the 4th seed, win the South, and their host. Another scenario where the Packers, who lost to the Eagles in week 1, are the 7th seed traveling to Philly to play the Eagles. So pretty much, I think the Falcons are kind of the wild card. They've already played the Vikings. We saw that a couple weeks ago. The Vikings really dominant in that game, but not a lot of new scenarios for the NFC. A lot of teams that have already met are very, very likely to see each other again in the postseason. And I think that's so telling about, the true contenders in the NFC this season is the Vikings, the Lions, the Packers, like everybody's beating each other up. And you want that because it's iron sharpens iron, but it's going to make the playoffs, I think even more of a nail biter because there's not really a lot of unfamiliarity. The teams that you're seeing are teams you've already seen. And, you have a chip on your shoulder now going into that next matchup.
No, 100%. And there's a level of familiarity too that will require both sides to do something new and pull some, not tricks out of the bag. I'm not talking like trick plays, but you're not going to necessarily be able to just like run your bread and butter offense and defense. Like these teams know you, they have tons of film on you, they've played you. And so you're going to have to I just think you can't play not that you ever want to play your bread and butter, but when you're playing a, random AFC opponent, you don't necessarily need to pull too many, like go deep into the playbook, right? With these matchups, especially I think between the NFC North opponents, like these guys have seen each other time and time again. They're going to know your tendencies, and your go-tos, your tells, your reads. They have so much tape on you. So you are going to need to be like super sharp, and potentially have some creative things in the bag to pull out.
Yeah, so let's talk about then what is so different about this matchup, because obviously the Packers and Vikings have not played since week 4. That was 2 games after the Malik Willis experience. Obviously, Jordan Love kind of came back, maybe you could argue a little bit early from the knee injury. He didn't really look like himself. He wasn't very mobile, wasn't necessarily able to step into his throws. And it still ended up being a really good football game. Not the first half for the Packers, obviously, shut out, but finishing the game 31-29 and a 2-point loss. Jordan Love had a really nice second half of that game and put up crazy stats, his biggest numbers of the season as far as volume to try and get the Packers back into that one, but just a really different time to face this Vikings team that, like you said before, is really healthy, and the Packers now significantly banged up on defense. We don't know what's going to happen with Javon Bullard or Evan Williams. We don't know what's going to happen. Well, we think Jair is another no-go. Quay Walker, it sounds like, is not practicing a ton, so 4 starters probably missing again on the defense against a Vikings offense that is still putting up some significant points. So could be tricky.
Yeah. We talked about it pre-show, and you have all the stats. So our stat girl Maggie is going to get into the Vikings defense and how good they are, because they're pretty much, I think, top 3 in every like meaningful metric. But this is going to be a huge test for this offense. I mean, this offense has steadily over the last 6 weeks, I'd say, been one of the best offenses in the league by, again, every metric that there is, EPA per play, DVOA, however you want to cut it and look at it. They have been moving the ball, putting up points, whether it's on the ground, as we know, in the run game, but through the air too. This is going to be their biggest test of whether they can do that against one of the best defenses in the league. Can they put up 30 plus against, a very good Vikings defense? Can they get Josh Jacobs going on the ground against one of the best rushing defenses? This is, I think, the key matchup to me in this game is Brian Flores versus Jordan Love. You mentioned last year's New Year's Eve game, and I always think of that game as like not Jordan's coming out, because Thanksgiving was that, but Jordan's football IQ like test, right? He went up again against Brian Flores, who every quarterback says is their biggest litmus test of whether they can read a defense, because he has so many disguises and is so hard to know what they're going to call. And I like to think that Jordan can, but can he not? He's been very clean again since coming out of the bye, but can he keep that streak going against this team and move the offense the way he has the last 6 weeks? If the Packers can play the way that they have since the bye, I think they have a very good shot in this game for sure, especially if they can get the run game going against the Vikings. But Jordan versus Brian Flores is 1A on how this game goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, the Vikings, to their credit, are winning a ton of close games, and we've also seen them, in some blowouts. Obviously, they took care of business against the Falcons, had a really dominant win against the Bears. But it was a field goal victory against Seattle that came down to the wire. That was a really close game. It was a 1-point win against the Cardinals not that long ago. We saw them obviously win in overtime against the Bears back in November. So they are getting into some really close scenarios. And like we saw with the Packers and the Lions, I think the Packers are better poised now to win these kinds of shootouts, even with the defense, kind of being a question mark with some of their starters missing, because obviously we say that, and we have to give the Packers, their lumps, I guess, too, for a 34-point performance against a Saints offense that wasn't that great, right? So it's not like they've necessarily beat juggernauts the last couple weeks either, but I think that's why this game is so important and going to be so telling. To your point about the Vikings defense, yeah, they're one of the best in the league. Obviously, Brian Flores has them in every position to be successful. They're third in points against. They're averaging like 18.4 points a game, which is really phenomenal. They're first in fourth down conversions, second and third down conversions. They are second in rushing yards, rushing attempts, and rushing yards per attempt. They have the most interceptions in the league. They have 22 interceptions as a defense, which is just bananas when you think about the fact that we've only played 15 games. So yeah, just a really big test for the Packers offense, which thankfully is at about full strength going into this one.
Yeah. The Packers offense, as usual, is not necessarily what I'm worried about. I think if they can get off to a hot start, completely opposite of what happened the last time these two teams played, they can stay in it with this team. You said it. The Vikings are really only winning really close games right now. I would love to know what their point differential is, actually. They have all the tools in their arsenal on the offensive side of the ball to kind of take the lead. and then give their defense the ability to play the way their defense likes to play with a lead and be aggressive. But this could end up being a shootout very easily. And I see it going in that direction.
And I think, that's, I guess, your concern with a shootout is not having Jair, not having Evan Williams, not having Javon Bullard. This is one of the better offenses as well, of course, that the Packers are going to see. Sam Darnold is playing really well. He plays really well against pressure, so it's not like you can send the house at him. And he's been really well, or doing really well against the blitz this season. Justin Jefferson's healthy. Jordan Addison is a really nice tandem with him. Obviously, both of those players playing phenomenally. Aaron Jones is always dynamic in the backfield. So just a really healthy Vikings offense and a really good test for, kind of what Mina said too a couple weeks ago. The offenses that the Packers should see again in the postseason, right? The Eagles have Saquon. Like, you're always going to run into these types of offenses in the postseason. So how the Packers can respond being down bodies will tell us, I think, a lot about how they're poised, or how deep they're poised for a playoff push.
Yeah. I mean, I do think like the Packers have been without Ja now for weeks. So
Right.
It's hard for me to say, well, it's a disadvantage. Well, they've been winning games without him now. And not just against bad teams, right? I mean, the Seattle Seahawks have, I think, a really strong wide receiver core. I mean, DK Metcalf, JSN, even Tyler Lockett still. So they did just fine with those guys. Not having Javon Bullard, not having Evan Williams obviously hurts you. I didn't expect Javon Bullard to be back either. I would love to have at least Evan Williams back. I feel confident that the linebacker core will be okay without Quay because of the way that Edgerrin Cooper has been playing. So this tandem in Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson is I think quite easily the most difficult to go up against, and I fully expect that they are going to get theirs. It's just a matter of how much can you limit the big play that they can, the explosives that they can get. Because if you can limit it, at least not shut it down, but limit it and give yourself the opportunity to respond, then the Packers will stay in this game. The difficult scenario that will be where they have to come back from is the same as what happened last time, where you find yourself in a 2-score hole, because that's where the Vikings will start to really pound on you and spiral it down. And Brian Flores can start to like really throw this kitchen sink at your offense. And then it starts to get out of hand. So I feel a lot more confident about this defense than week 4. They're playing as a much more cohesive unit. I think Jeff Hafley is calling the defense in a way that he would prefer, even without some of their starters. Pass rush is starting to look a lot better the last couple of weeks, regardless of, Sam Darnold being good against pressure. You still want to get pressure no matter what. You never know. But you just want to limit the explosiveness of their 2 top wide receivers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this one too, it feels like a cliche to say it every week, but I think this one really comes down to turnovers. These are 2 really good teams when it comes to protecting the football and taking away the football. The Packers are plus 12 in turnover differential. The Vikings are plus 10 in turnover differential. So clearly getting a ton more takeaways than giving the ball away. Both teams protecting the football really well. And I think this is one of those games, like you said, if you steal one and you can run up the score a little bit and make the other team play from behind, it's going to be really hard for either team to get back into this one. So there's a part of me that, to your point earlier in the season when we talked about Matt LaFleur, I almost am curious if you'd rather have him defer or take the ball if he wins the toss to start the game. Like, do you want to just start with your foot on the gas and try to score? Or do you want to have the chance to double up at halftime and hope that your defense can hold on that first possession?
No, I'm so take the ball first mentality. I think this team especially does its best when they get the ball, they get foot on the gas, they have a good scoring first drive, and then they play with a lead. That is the way that this team plays its best. I know we talked about it, and a lot of people came for this take with the Lions game, but they didn't do it with the Lions game. And I genuinely feel like it would be different if the Packers start that game 7-0. So don't play they take the ball every other game. don't play any differently just because this opponent happens to be a more difficult opponent. I think even Jordan has said in interviews or pressers, like, we love being able to gas pedal and be hot right from the start. So stick with that.
All right. I think that brings us then to the last question, and that is score prediction.
I actually don't see this being as high scoring as the last few. I think it's somewhere in the 20s. Still a close game for sure. I'm thinking like 27, 24, 24, 21, somewhere in that range. I know that these are two very, very good offenses, but I think the defenses are going to be the ones who dictate this game. And I'm going with the Packers because I can't not.
That's kind of how I feel. I kind of feel the same way that I felt about the Lions game, where whoever has the ball last is probably going to win this one. And again, that's a reason for Matt LaFleur to be aggressive, because you want to have that last possession. It was so gut-wrenching to see the Lions just hold the ball and knowing that the Packers are never going to get it back. But I feel like 31-28 is going to be kind of what it comes down to. I think it could come down to a last-second field goal. But both of these offenses are averaging, the Packers have put up 30-plus points in 5 straight games. The Vikings have had some 42-pointers in there that make their average down to 30 points. So really high-profile offenses against, yes, really good defenses, but I think they're going to light it up at US Bank. So I'll take the Packers just because I don't want to think of any other alternatives to them not winning this one.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
That'll do it.
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be a really, really good game. Like we said, we'll be back to talk about it afterwards. And of course, maybe get a little bit more clarity on this playoff picture as things unfold. Week 18 is going to be crazy. We'll obviously talk about it after Sunday's matchup. So enjoy this one, Packers fans. And we'll be back, of course, next week. You can find us on YouTube at Pax What She Said. Please like and subscribe to the show if you don't already, at PWSS Podcast on Twitter, at Pax What She Said on Blue Sky, Spotify, everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Perri at Perri_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. And we're almost done with regular season football. And then we have the playoffs to talk about, which is exciting and terrifying, but that's why we love it. So enjoy the game and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.